Breaking news, a senior Hamas official tells the BBC it has agreed to disarm in Gaza. That's after Donald Trump says his Board of Peace had reached a deal for the complete disarmament of Hamas and other armed groups in the Strip. Under the agreement, Israeli forces will withdraw as a new Palestinian police force is put in place. The US president said the agreement is a critical step towards Gaza finally being governed by a new Palestinian government that will work closely with the Board of Peace to help the Palestinian people. At the same time, Israel will have the security it deserves, with Gaza no longer used as a base for terror attacks. Well, let's get more on this with our correspondent Shaima Khalil. Shaima, like we heard there, Hamas has agreed to this, but have we heard anything from Israel yet?
Israel hasn't officially commented on this, but look, potentially this is quite a significant move because we have heard from Hamas. They've told the BBC that they have agreed to disarm completely from Gaza. And we've also obtained the text of the roadmap, and it really gives you a first-hand glimpse at these phases of the plan to disarm and for them to give up not just civil control, but also military control of Gaza. This is a very complex operation. It will take a very, very long time. And I cannot emphasize enough that when you say there is a phased process, we've had phases before where you get to phase one and it goes on, but then hurdles come and phase two and phase three, especially with so many details. But the plan itself starts with the smaller armed groups in Gaza disarming. Then you move to Hamas's military infrastructure itself. And that is a huge and complex infrastructure. It includes tunnels, it includes production facilities, heavy weaponry, personal weaponry, as well of military personnel of Hamas. On the other side, Hamas is expecting immediate humanitarian measures, 600 trucks of humanitarian aid, and the phased withdrawal of the Israeli forces. All of these are key details for this operation to go ahead. We've seen an impetus from Washington, from the White House, from the president, and from US officials who say, we really want this to happen. I think one thing that stood out to me when US officials were briefing the press is they said that this plan, in other words, they're going in knowing that those two sides don't trust each other, knowing that those two sides have made agreements before and they've fallen through, but also the fact that neither Israel nor Hamas is going to get to the next phase without this being verified. But also, I think that the fact that you've got President Trump pushing this ahead doesn't necessarily mean that the Israeli government, the Israeli leadership is going to play along. We have an initial agreement from Hamas, but what that means on the ground, what it will look like in terms of disarming, what it will look like in terms of giving up control, but also remember what it would look like in terms of a ceasefire. That means that the bombing of Gaza has to stop. We've been there before with another ceasefire agreement that President Trump spearheaded when he went to Sharm el-Sheikh, when he went to Israel, and that has fallen through.
Yeah.
And so I think everybody's going into this with eyes open about what it will take for this to actually be implemented.
Shaima, really appreciate you putting all of that into context for us. And let's just continue this conversation now with Ahmed Fouad Al-Khatib, resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Middle East programs. Ahmed, like we heard from Shaima there's a lot of questions here about how this is going to play out, what this will look like. Realistically, how can we verify that Hamas and these other groups are going to be disarming?
Well, that's the challenge, is that we absolutely have no real way of doing so, especially because the implementation is going to take hundreds of days, estimates in 200 to 300 days. We're talking about an international security force or stabilization force that needs months to be stood up, a police force for Gaza under NCAG, the Technocratic Transitional Committee, that needs months, if not an entire year, to be ready to enter Gaza. So that's on one end. In the interim, Hamas on the other end will have plenty of time to potentially scheme and put in contingency plans for should multiple phases succeed, but then the final phases fail, to maybe retrieve some of those weapons that it will stash away in hidden away tunnels that we don't know about. So that's going to be the challenge. But I will say that the main skepticism that I have is that this a disarmament comes a week after the newly appointed leader of Hamas, Khalil al-Hayya, who's aligned with the Islamic Republic of Iran, gave this fiery speech that doubled down on the jihadi narrative, that doubled down on armed resistance. And it didn't really signal any movement from an ethos and a political pragmatism point of view away from armed resistance towards a political strategy. So if that's not coupled with the decision to disarm, I'm very skeptical that this is actually going to survive contact from coming from the outside world where Hamas's negotiators are into the ground where Hamas's guys with guns are, and we know that they have the real authority to implement this.
Yeah, that's really fascinating putting that in context. And I mean, of course, a lot of skepticism from Israel as well, perhaps. And how do you think they will be reacting to this? As part of this deal, they have to withdraw.
Well, I think the Israelis are probably looking for time. They're nothing. I don't suspect Israel is going to go for this before the elections. I think the current Israeli government can make a legitimate case for why it does not have a mandate to make substantial decision making. Of course, I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm not saying that that is even correct, but nevertheless, I don't think the Israeli government, for its own interests and its own designs, will make any decisions before the elections. I think there's also going to be the skepticism that the Israelis know Hamas has done schemes like that. I mean, just a month ago, Hamas announced that it is going to dissolve its governing apparatus, only to have contacts that I have on the ground in Gaza affirm that the group is collecting taxes more than ever. The group has been engaging in law enforcement activities more than ever. And so the Israelis have the ability to see Hamas on the ground, and they're going to be extraordinarily skeptical. They're also going to treat what President Trump is saying about the historic nature of this in the same way that we've seen dozens of declarations by the US president with regard to Iran and ceasefires and the opening of the Strait of Hormuz and wrath and fire and fury, only for those to either not pan out or to turn out to be empty rhetoric. So that, I think, is going to be an anchor point for the Israelis to look at both Hamas in Gaza and the US president and the Trump administration, to not really trust either promises or the fulfillment of the agreement by the group on the ground.
Yeah, a lot of up in the air still, and we'll have to wait and see how Israel agrees or reacts to that. Ahmed, really great to be able to get your analysis there. Ahmed Fuad Al-Khatib, Resident Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Middle East Programs.